If I could have your attention for a moment. We are short one board member for our quorum. He is en route. So before we call the meeting to order, we're going to dispose of certain items on the agenda that don't require official action. And I'd like to begin by asking everyone to stand for a moment of reflection, followed by a pledge to the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Go Jags.
I think I heard a go Jags there. So let's see. Let's go ahead and get our safety briefing. Mr. McElroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Safety is core value at JEA. We start every meeting with a safety message. In the need of an emergency, Ted Hobson will call security and 911, and Mike Rost will be in charge of CPR. In the event we need to evacuate, I ask you to help your neighbor both left and right. We'll use the stairs to the left of the elevator. Ask everybody to go orderly, holding the handrail. When we exit down to the plaza, we will proceed to the open parking lot on the southeast corner of Main and Church. Be very cautious crossing the street. Use the safety traffic signals before crossing the street. All cell phones, please put on silent. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. Ms. Brooks, our Chief Legal Officer, is Sunshine Law and Public Record Statement.
This is a legally authorized and noticed public meeting. We do not quite currently have quorum, but quorum will be present shortly. No action items will be taken up until we have quorum. Most of the items being discussed will be informational at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
And minutes will be taken.
Thank you. And then comments from the public. We have one comment card, Mr. Todd Logston.
Yes, sir.
You come up to the podium, please give your name, your address, and limit your remarks to 3 minutes, please. Morning, Mr. Logston.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Todd Logston, and I live at 2954 Bridlewood Lane, Jacksonville, Florida, over in Mandarin. Okay, I'm here on behalf of a friend named Don Carlson. He's a financial consultant with Direct Link Capital Corp. I believe he's been in contact with several of y'all. Direct Link is an underwriter for a private multi-billion-dollar Wall Street fund, solar fund. They are providing 100% funding for large solar projects that are near shovel ready. They will fund these projects up to $1 billion at a low single-digit rates with flexible options. Now, I know JEA already has funded options and may be planning to use bond funding or other Wall Street options for their upcoming solar projects. However, with the recent changes in big financing for solar projects, Direct Link Corp is a private solar fund that may be best for the 100% financing. This is a multi-billion-dollar private fund that wants to fund large projects, and they have billions of dollars to fund shovel-ready projects. I would think it's a good idea to listen to my friend Don and listen to what he wants to share with you. I believe he may be able to save JEA tens of millions along with the City of Jacksonville and the taxpayers. Direct Link Corp is a customized and has flexibility to direct JEA or the winning bidder or the winning operator they can find. Since Don is a friend of mine and I live in Jacksonville, he's asked me to set up a conference call to see what the best possible financing could be. I believe Don has reached out previously to CFO Melissa Dykes via FedEx and email on December 13th, but was blocked. Who would I need to coordinate this conference call with on financing?
Thank you, Mr. Logston. I appreciate your comments. I don't know how Don's FedExed to Ms. Dykes was blocked, but Ms. Dykes is the appropriate person. You can just follow up with her.
Okay. Is she in the room by chance?
She is in the room, and you can speak with her after the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next comment is from John Nooney. Mr. Nooney, if you'd make your comments at the podium, just give your name, address, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes.
Hello, my name's John Nooney, 8356 Bascom Road, Jacksonville, Florida, 32216. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. You know, I'm here my concern is about the district property, the JEA property. And, you know, when, I think of the JEA, okay, building community. Well, I'm just not feeling it with that project. Now, my biggest concern is the water access component of the project. Now, I've participated in a lot of different things. I participated in One Spark. I had a waterway component project, got crushed. Right now, if you go down to the 4th floor of City Hall, we have our Discover Downtown Jax mapping guide. You open it up, and there's a map of downtown. And you know what? You don't see one kayak launch. The River City boat ramp is gone. And so here you have the district. And where is the public access component in this? So, I have some real concerns going forward. We're getting ready to market ourselves to the world. We're going to be the center stage. I came before the JEA board prior to, and the legislation, I believe, was 2015-777. And that was, to give the waterways, or the district, the control. And we have a new DIA, a Downtown Investment Authority. And let me just share a number of other pieces of legislation. 2016-18, that was the ADA kayak launch next to the school board property. Super opportunity right next to this potential project. Other pieces of legislation that are being created right now, but the biggest concern, and it should be for all of us, is that this piece of property, city owned and JEA owned, that you create what will be community access to it, and not just give it to one single person. I've got dozens of examples that I could just share with you, but I'm only down to 17 seconds. I want to be one of the biggest cheerleaders for downtown, but the only way that's going to happen is if you're allowed to participate and access the St. Johns River and American Heritage River, a federal initiative, in our new 2014 560 zone. All right. All right. See, I'm getting pulled out already.
Great time. Thank you, Mr. Nooney. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, I think those are our public comments. I'll turn to our council liaison, Matt Schellenberg. Mr. Schellenberg.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have no comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And then our mayoral liaison, Dr. Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I have no comments.
Great. This meeting's going fantastic. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kerry Stewart to present the results of our J.D. Power survey. Yes, Mr. Cumber.
Mr. Chairman, just before Ms. Stewart starts, just one clarification question. The agenda item 3B3, is there a difference between what was put at our seat today and what was emailed last night, or is it the same document?
It's the same document.
Okay.
Right. Ms. Stewart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Board. I am here today to talk to you about the J.D. Power Business Survey FY18 final results. In getting started, I want to talk just a little bit again what makes the business survey different from the residential survey. The business survey for J.D. Power targets 99 electric companies from around the country with a minimum of 25,000 business customers each. They have 2 fielding periods as opposed to the 4 that you might be accustomed to with the residential survey. Their online survey consists of over 140 questions, and they receive over 25,000 responses each year. And of that, about 200 of those are JEA-specific responses. The official score is reported each year in January, and here we are. I'm happy to report that JEA finished the year from the business survey side with a total score of 791 on the Customer Satisfaction Index. That kept us in the first quartile nationally within the industry, ranked 13th out of 86 in the industry, and second out of 5 in the state of Florida. Gulf Power is the only Florida company that outranked us. We actually even beat the Florida average. So on this slide, I'd like to draw your attention to the pie charts at the bottom. Again, all of the same drivers make up the score for the survey, but they are weighted differently in the business side as opposed to the residential side. So if we take a look at each of the drivers and how we performed with Wave 1 and Wave 2 and ended up, in terms of being easy to do business with, in customer service and power quality reliability, we ended up in the second quartile individually for those two drivers. But in terms of empowering customers to make informed decisions, in billing and payment and communications, we did outstanding and finished in the first quartile. Price, we just barely eked out. We fell into the second quartile. Demonstrating community responsibility continues to be a strong suit for us, and we remain in the first quartile. So if we take a look at overall how we stacked up against the other 86 companies that were surveyed, you'll see, again, JEA finished 13th. And you may remember I said they survey 99 companies across the country. If there aren't enough responses received for the score to be considered statistically significant, they don't publish the results. That's why you see only 86 out of the 99 companies that are typically surveyed. On the next slide, you can see each of the drivers and how we performed this year and the total score for each individual driver, and then in parentheses, how we scored based on last year. We outperformed on price, billing and payment, corporate citizenship, and communications. Again, we stayed steady at power quality and reliability with a very good score of 816, and we dropped in customer service 16 points to 813. We'll talk more about how we plan to address that as we go forward. Again, our overall ranking was 791, which put us outperforming the industry and all other South mid-sized average for companies. This next chart shows you our last 5 years' performance, starting from the left of the slide, which gives you our overall customer satisfaction index and the total scores there. You can see steady improvement on that overall score year over year. And you'll see the same for all of the drivers, again, with the exception of customer service, where we dropped 16 points from last year. The next slide will demonstrate the year-over-year performance of JEA versus the industry. So again, starting from the left is our overall customer satisfaction index, and you see across the way each driver, our total score, we outperformed the industry even in customer service. This next slide narrows the window a bit. Instead of looking over the last 5 years, what you'll see is just year-over-year performance with the 4 waves. 2 waves each year. This is a 2-year snapshot of how we performed. So you can see there's a little more volatility in the numbers, especially in customer service, going up and down. But again, that's each individual wave. What I would also ask you to notice is that in Wave 1, which is the green, in customer service, we scored a 790. By focusing on customer service and some of those attributes, we pulled it up to an 839 for Wave 2. It still only averaged out to 813, but by putting a lot of focus on those individual attributes, we were able to bring that score up in the second half of FY18. The next slide is trends. This is the overall score for each individual driver not weighted. That's why the trend will look slightly different than maybe some of the numbers that you've seen previous. That notwithstanding, the trends are very good. I want to talk a little bit Mr. Chairman, about what we plan to do for our business customers as we move forward to get this score back up to where we want to be, especially in customer service, but overall ranked higher than before in the top quartile. So this first slide speaks specifically to power quality and reliability. We see the potential to gain 38 points this year alone. And again, I would draw your eyes to 6 of the component diagnostics listed here are related specifically to outage communications. As you know, since Matthew and Irma, outage communications have been a priority of this board and the staff here at JEA. So we do think by focusing on outage communications, we're going to be able to see a substantial increase in that score. We will be giving you an update at next month's board meeting about where we stand with outage communications. Next, taking a look at corporate citizenship. Believe it or not, we see about 30 potential points here in this driver alone, and key to that will be customers' familiarity with energy efficiency programs and their understanding of JEA's role in economic development opportunities for our community. These are business customers, not residential, so they get a lot more one-on-one touches than a residential customer. So again, the goal would be to make sure that they are familiar with the energy efficiency programs that are available to them as business owners, as well as our ongoing support of economic development efforts with the mayor's office and the chamber as we go forward. Billing and payment, we stayed steady. We don't see a whole lot of price gains there, but we intend to continue to focus on being easy to do business with by maintaining the multiple payment options for our business customers and continuing to make it easier for our business customers to make their payments. It's critically important to our residential customers, obviously, but this is a key driver for our business customers. Communications, only 3 points we see to gain there, and again, we will continue to communicate company information and news that is relevant to our business customers. Customer service, again, this is where we seem to have taken a hit, not seem to, this is where we took a hit in the survey this year. So we're going to continue to focus on our customer service in terms of hold time and customers being put on hold, as well as problems being solved for the first time a customer calls. We focus on first contact resolution on both the residential and the business side, but all of these diagnostic components continue to be an issue because of staffing. And we are focusing on staffing and training and the quality of that staffing to get hold times down, to not have to put a customer on hold to begin with, and to resolve that customer's issue the first time they call in.
Carrie, what do you mean by staffing? Short staff?
Short
Turnover?
staffing, turnover, yes, sir. On the account rep side, that has been, it's a good news story. A lot of our account reps find other places to move up and out within the JEA family. So that is what's happened in our account rep side, on the business side. And our call center, as you probably know, month after month, it continues to be a struggle of turnover. And lastly, we identified a couple of extra points we could eke out for next year that aren't necessarily tied to any of the others. And again, for the business survey results, think about the fact that we have account reps that go out and do these in-person discussions and account reviews with our business customers. So we're going to focus on one or more proactive account contacts for this year, which we weren't able to do last year because we were shorthanded. And then focusing with these customers on the number of product and service offerings that are available to them. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Questions, Mr. Cumber?
I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Green?
I'm good.
Reverend Newbill?
I'm fine.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. I had a couple of questions.
Okay.
Paul, looking at the list of the 86, those that ranked higher than us, are they larger, smaller, comparably sized?
All of the above. Here we go. I'm just looking at,
Are you still president of APPA?
I'm on the executive committee. These generally are all larger than us.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
I would, with the exception, Gulf Power is about the same size. The other one's out of state, yep.
And Ms. Stewart, the customer service ding we took in wave 2, is it related to, have you guys drilled down, is it related to communications primarily during the storms?
No, sir. That wave actually takes place at the beginning of the year. It could have had some latent leftover issues from Matthew, because this would have been the first quarter of FY17, of calendar year 17.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry, I misunderstood the dates that they were measuring from. Well, it does seem like there's some room for improvement. I encourage you and your staff to get those scores up. Thank you.
We will do it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I apologize for the delay in calling the meeting to order. Revenue Bill, we understand you had good cause to be late. We're glad you made it. We're short, and Ms. Kessler is ill, and Ms. Flanagan is in Minneapolis planning for the Super Bowl. That's what happens when you make the top 4. So she wasn't able to be here today. But with that said, we now have a quorum, so we'll call the meeting to order, and we'll move directly to item 3A, the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, motion approved. Any second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, consent agenda passes. We're up to 3B1, and this is Ms. Dykes, water and sewer rate.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
On the electric side of our tariff, we have certain offerings that are specifically designed to encourage economic development, that allow us to measure impact on the community by things like new jobs that are brought to Northeast Florida. The recommendation that's before the board to consider today is a recommendation to call a public hearing at the next board meeting to open the water and sewer tariff to allow us to implement a tariff that roughly mirrors that the electric side of the business. This tariff modification would modify the wastewater tariff to allow us to implement a rate that would recognize the value that a very large wastewater customer in excess of 1 million gallons a day would bring to the business. That could only be implemented when certain criteria is met, like jobs brought to the region, coupled with available capacity for treatment on the wastewater side. Behind tab 3B1, there is a form of changes to the tariff in terms of the red line document that's there. That's for illustrative purposes. We do expect a few additional cleanup changes between now and next month, but that gives you the general idea of the tariff modification that's being proposed for the hearing next month. So again, the recommendation from staff today is that the board consider calling a public hearing at the board meeting next month.
Very good. So it's really to mirror our economic development tariff on the electric side.
Correct.
Okay. Here, a motion to call a public hearing.
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Sorry.
Sorry, discussion.
Discussion, thank you. Not that I'm trying to slow things down.
It's all
but
right.
just so this is not specific to any one customer. It's any customer that would come in, post the approval of this, that would have a sewer volume in excess of 1 million gallons.
The way that the tariff modification is designed, it could apply to any customer that meets these requirements. The introduction of the tariff was driven by a specific economic development opportunity that may materialize where it would get applied in the short term, but in general, it's designed to have long-term implications.
And so if there is a customer that exists today that hits that threshold, what do they get a change in their rate as well, or do they just miss the ability to participate in the rate?
That's an excellent question. The short answer is they do not get a change. One of the drivers or one of the criteria for being able to qualify for this rate is new jobs to the region. So to the extent they have an expansion that would allow them just by virtue of the expansion to meet this rate, then it may be something we can consider applying to that customer. But for existing customers who aren't bringing new employment opportunities, we would not qualify.
Okay. That was it, Mr. Chairman.
Great questions, thank you. How many customers do we have that are over 1 million gallons a day in wastewater? Are there a lot?
Fewer than 5.
Less than 5? Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Now we can vote. All in favor of calling the public hearing?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, Ms. Dykes.
Thank you.
We're up to 3B2, real estate purchase and sale agreement for the Southside Generating Station. I understand we have Mr. Michael Munns, a representative of Elements in the audience, who'd like to make a report and request to the board. Mr. Munns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Appreciate you allowing me to speak during this discussion item. What we would like to do is to bring to your attention and make a request that we look at the Fourth Amendment to the Purchase and Sale Agreement, that we go back to a straight purchase and sale agreement with the JEA board, remove the transference with the JEA and the DIA as the DIA voted on last week, set that on the table, and just stick with the purchase and sale agreement as amended, but stay with the July 2018 close date.
Thank you, Mr. Munns. So, Ms. Brooks, let me just make sure I understand exactly where we are contractually with Mr. Munns and the Elements Group. Under the Fourth Amendment that we passed at our last board meeting, there was an extension to accommodate an assignment at that time contemplated with the city of Jacksonville, and we gave them until March 30 of 2018 to consummate that assignment with an extension to July 16, 2018 on the closing date, right?
That's correct.
And so, Mr. Munns, you're asking that we just go back to the original deal, really preceding the Fourth Amendment's reference to an assignment, and ask that JEA board honor those dates, but exclude the assignment portion?
Exclude that paragraph that talks about the assignment, yes, sir.
Okay. Then I would entertain a motion from one of my fellow directors to delegate to Mr. McElroy the authority to enter into an amendment to our purchase and sale agreement with Elements to remove the assignment language from the Fourth Amendment and allow a closing under the original contract with the closing deadline of July 16. And what's the March 30 date?
That was the date that they were to enter into an
So that
assignment
just goes away.
agreement. Right.
Closing by July 16, 2018. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Discussion.
I'd like us to also consider some language that we would direct Mr. McElroy, that it'd be the wish of the board that this would be the last amendment. And if we did move to closure by July 16th, that we would go back out to an RFP. But I think the fact that we're moving the March 30th date, and if Mr. Munns is comfortable with that, I'd like that to be part of the Fifth Amendment that we would make.
I'm sorry, you'd like it to be the sense of the board that there's
Correct.
no further amendment?
That we are extending, I think this was executed about 3 years ago. And my understanding would be that the reason that they want to extend to July 16th is they feel comfortable doing a straight-up deal with JEA. And so that would be, the wish of the board that this would close by July 16th.
I appreciate that sentiment. You'll recall that the last time they came up for an extension, I was one who was, among others, yourself perhaps included, that said we didn't like any further extensions on this contract. I don't feel strongly that that should be an amendment item, but I certainly feel comfortable saying that's a strong sense of the board.
That I'd want it to be noted on the record that that would be if board members agree that that was a strong sense of the board.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Noted.
Okay.
Sense of the board is no further extensions. Other discussion on this motion? So we go back to a straight-up deal, closing by July 16.
So basically what we're talking about is moving the city out of.
That's right.
The part that we put in, let's take that out. And go back to the straight deal.
We didn't put the city in,
Well, I know
but we're
that.
taking them out.
Well, actually, we voted.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Ms. Green?
I also feel that I don't think we should lock ourselves in, that the possibility of a future extension may be a benefit to JEA. So I would agree that we not lock ourselves in for the possibility of another extension.
Any other comments or concerns? Mr. Cumber?
Nope, I think this, I'm very supportive of this because it puts it back where the original deal was intended. So I appreciate the bidders coming back to JEA and thinking hard about simplifying it from our perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Munns, I appreciate you being here today. I will tell you that I commend you, and I think I speak for all of the members of the board here at JEA when we say that the vision and bold ideas embodied in the proposed elements development bode well for Jacksonville and have the opportunity to really transform the South Bank. So we're excited about it. Look forward to it coming up out of the ground. And I echo Mr. Cumber's remarks. I appreciate your efforts to bring this back to the terms of the original deal. I know you guys have worked hard. Been a lot of changes in the terms back and forth over the last couple of months, and you've still got a long way to go, but we wish you the best of success. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I may have missed something, but did we actually take the vote?
No, we're about ready to take the vote.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, all in favor of the motion? Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. You didn't miss anything.
Okay.
We're up to item 3B3, CEO contract modification extension. Again, Ms. Kessler isn't here as chair of the compensation committee, so I'll call on Ms. Brooks to present the proposed CEO contract extension.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wish Ms. Kessler had been here. It was at the direction of the Compensation Committee that we, through you and through Mr. McElroy, went through the negotiation of a revised and modified contract. Some of the key points of the new revisions is we updated the recitals and the agreement to reflect the most current data for JEA. We extend out the term of the agreement to January 1st of 2021. We removed the performance compensation provision, and again, this was at the request of the Compensation Committee, that Mr. McElroy had the ability to earn up to 15% of his base salary annually in a compensation performance metric. Instead of having that provision, it was asked that we look at 10% of an additional base salary change, which is reflected in the new agreement. We reduced the severance pay down from 1 year to 20 weeks to be aligned with the current statutory provisions on severance. We added a 60-day administrative leave provision, and we added a new change of control provision. And that's what was provided to you last evening, and that's what was on the chairs this afternoon for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. So that we can get some discussion going, I'd ask for a motion to approve the CEO contract modification extension as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Discussion. Mr. Cumber?
Ms. Brooks, will the executive team at JEA still participate in a incentive program?
They would, yes.
So what was the rationale between having the executive team have incentive pay, but not the CEO?
Well, in Ms. Kessler's absence, I'll speak to some of the discussion that took place at the Compensation Committee level. It's certainly been a lightning rod for controversy that Mr. McElroy has had incentive compensation, and he graciously agreed to withdraw from the incentive compensation program. I personally think that's a valuable benefit, and that, quite frankly, the ratepayers of JEA have a tremendous net benefit. As you may recall, that incentive compensation is only paid for out of savings realized by the efforts of the senior leadership team, executive leadership team. So that was really Mr. McElroy stepping up to say, let's remove any target for controversy here with the incentive compensation component of his package.
So, look, I appreciate that. I think it's a one-day issue when that gets reported.
Well, the good news is all the press chased Mr. Munns out, so they're not
Well,
even
that's
here.
even better. Now I know why this was agended after the real estate item. I don't feel that's going in the right direction. I personally am a proponent of more incentives. And especially when you think of the change in control and the language saying, you're trying to have the continued dedication of the CEO and the CEO's full attention to JEA, one of the ways you do that is through the incentive and the targets you set. And so I feel there's a disconnect between his executive team having incentive pay tied to performance, or part of their pay tied to performance, but then the CEO himself does not. So I'd ask we rethink that decision. And we come back to that. Ms. Brooks, is there some kind of some trigger or something that I'm missing, that this engagement letter expires January 1st of 2021 as opposed to December 31st of 2020? Does that extra day allow for something that I'm not understanding?
Yeah, there was a request of one of the parties to extend it to that date. I don't know if there was anything that triggers that particular date, all the way through December 31st.
Yeah, not aware of any vesting that takes place.
Okay, I didn't know if
or
one
tax
day.
consequences.
Okay.
Was the prior contract through 12/31?
No, it was through 9/30.
Right.
It's the end of the fiscal year.
And so this puts it, I would say that it has nothing to do with any additional accrued benefits. It has everything to do with tax planning.
Right.
Okay. The incentive pay, the change in control. So, Ms. Brooks, do we have a value on the 36 months of benefits?
You know, I asked HR this morning about that, and I don't have the number of what the 36 months' worth of benefits to be paid out would calculate out to be.
Well, with a fixed annual comp, you can do the math, right?
Well, this is benefits
This is
only.
benefits.
Oh, I'm sorry, the benefit
Continuation
portion.
of benefits, 36 months. Rule of thumb, it's, I think, 30% of base salary in a typical market. If you want to just do a back of the envelope.
And so just kind of maybe go back to kind of like a global place where what I'm trying to get my head around. Recognize this, we got this last night. So I'm trying to think of, what we have going on right now in the various discussions. I recognize why a change in control is in place. I'm debating whether one-time salary versus two-time salary would be more appropriate. And whether or not there should be a tie as well to, another employment agreement that Mr. McElroy may join. So, and I'll give you a perfect example, GE, granted they've got their financial issues, not like us, but, or they have financial issues, we do not. But, in their situation, when you have these types of scenarios, it terminates if the employee were to find gainful employment somewhere else. So just like the benefits would terminate, the question is, in my head, I have a debate as to whether it should be two-time salary or one, given the fact that we're a public utility, and then whether or not that should be tied to any employment that the employee would have after being terminated in a change of control. Those are my comments.
Duly noted. Ms. Green?
The compensation, rather it be for the CEO or the executive team, understanding that there seems to be they're both graded on a performance level, but the CEO being tied to savings. Is that what I heard?
Actually, the entire incentive compensation plan for all members of the executive management team, senior leadership team that participate, get graded on performance.
So being a public entity, I think perception sometimes with Mr. McElroy having to take on the media's response as well as the public response, I commend him for taking this position because being a public entity, we want the public to feel like the savings reflects back into the community and not necessarily within or to an individual. So once again, I commend Mr. McElroy for taking this position. Those would be my comments.
Reverend Newbill?
If he want to, I would like to hear Mr. McElroy's response to this.
Feel comfortable responding to some of the concerns that have been expressed by Mr. Cumber, or just in general to the contract?
I'm just saying the difference between where he was
Yeah.
and where it is now.
Well, I think probably the issue of incentive was what was stated here already, so I don't need to be redundant there. But additionally, the fact that there is a term in about 2 or 3 years where there will be a transition. And I think probably at that point in time, having a neat ending to the last year or so, just on base, versus having goals and objectives and incentives hanging out over the transition to the next leader of JEA is something that I was mindful of, and I think is important and would be helpful to that transition process. And that's going to be, and I'm not saying that's not next year or the year after, but in terms of looking at the total here of this contract and the extension now, at some point in time, there'll be a new leader, and that leader, I think, should transition into an organization that isn't talking publicly and having this large debate about incentive or non-incentive. And quite frankly, me and my role need to just fade away quietly and let the organization move on gracefully. And so I think that was in connection with some of the other past challenges we've had in terms of not just the one time, but the months of meetings in terms of setting goals and the debate that the board was put in terms of microscopic goals or broad goals, and there was an awful lot of time that was spent, and I don't think at the end of the day that the ratepayers felt that there was value in terms of establishing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for those comments. I will say that I echo the remarks of Mr. Cumber in that I personally believe incentive compensation can play a very valuable role in the success of an organization and in properly aligning the goals and objectives of the individuals who comprise the executive and senior leadership team with the goals of the other constituency, in this case our ratepayers. So I do believe in incentive compensation as a rule. However, in this particular case, for many of the reasons that Mr. McElroy has just recited, I certainly understand why he, as the CEO, made the decision to offer up a sacrifice of his incentive compensation to relieve the community of that discussion, the internal participants and the board participants in that entire analysis that goes on in terms of quantifying goals and performance against those goals. So I am comfortable with his decision to withdraw from the incentive compensation and just adjust the base. And I would also note that the board materials included a study that JEA requested from its HR consultants at Willis Towers Watson, which shows that even with the new base pay reflected in the contract before us today, on the 50th percentile, he's still below his peers in virtually every category. So you look at the 50th percentile and where JEA is in terms of revenues and generation capacity, and that's who we should be looking at, and that's the center column on this graph that shows in parentheses how much short his compensation is from the targeted compensation of a combined peer group, investor owner utility peer group, and public power peers. So it's clear that the compensation is set at the right level. So I'm very comfortable with that component. Now, having said that, Mr. Cumber raises concerns about the change in control provisions that have been included in this contract for the first time, admittedly. Given the analysis being undertaken on behalf of JEA and the larger, broader public discussion around JEA's future, I think it's important that we as a board make sure that we secure the services of Mr. McElroy through any potential change. This is all very speculative at this point, but we've all got experience in private industry, and reality is that Mr. McElroy, or for that matter, any member of his senior leadership team, could probably go and make more money somewhere else. And that would be very detrimental to the success of this organization. So I happen to believe that a change of control clause is appropriate. We can talk about the particulars, and we can do that now, or I sense that, Mr. Cumber, you might want to take that back to Compensation Committee for livelier discussion?
Yeah, so here's where my challenge, I don't disagree with the concept of change in control.
Okay.
But a change in control should be an incentive to not have a change in control take place, but to create the largest value, or have the largest value creation take place if a change of control were to occur. So we're speaking hypothetically, but we have a real, real language in front of us, so we can't, we got to address the elephant in the room. If we were to go down that path, I would think everybody on this board would want to see the largest value be derived for JEA. And that's where incentive comes in. Now, in the private sector, what you have incentivizing you is most CEOs have not only a change in control, but they have equity, right? So what's governing them is they would never sell short the company in a change of control because they'd be selling themselves short. In this scenario, I'm trying to figure out how the CEO is incentivized if we went down that path, not just for a change in control to take place, but for the most creation of value to happen, right? And at the end of the day, the 4 board members sitting here are not going to be the ones in the management presentations to potential bidders talking about how to create that value, and therefore getting the most value on day one for us from an NPV standpoint, from a net present value standpoint. And so that's what I'm struggling with, right? And so for me, part of why the salary and having an incentive piece is, I think we're in a unique place where the compensation committee could really get their arms around what are the right incentives to put in place to make sure if we go down that path, Mr. McElroy is not just incentivized to have a change of control take place, but at a value that the ratepayers are proud to say, in that scenario, I'm happy to see JEA get privatized. And that's my struggle, and has nothing to do with whether or not I think Mr. McElroy would look out for the best interests of JEA, but you have to approach it not from an emotional standpoint, but from from my perspective, from an incentive standpoint.
Any other thoughts, Ms. Green?
No.
Reverend Newbill? Well, I would note that the current contract runs through September of this year.
Correct.
So this is not an emergency item, although I would like to see it resolved sooner rather than later. I suspect Mr. McElroy would as well. If I hear you correctly, Mr. Cumber, and you'd rather take this back to Compensation Committee for discussion, at least around the change of control triggers and measurements, incentives?
Unless this group wanted to hash it out a little bit. So I defer to you, Chairman, as to whether or not you'd want to continue the conversation at the board level or go back to compensation to have that discussion.
I think I'd prefer that we do that in committee and have committee report out a consensus. And I'd invite you to participate in that discussion. So I think the appropriate motion here would be to table the action if that's your desire. And we'll table the motion.
Well, there's a motion on the table, so I would.
Well, you can withdraw it, or you can table it.
I didn't make
to
the
next
motion.
meeting. Yeah, but you can make a motion to table it.
So I would make a motion to table.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All right, we've got a motion, a second. Any discussion on the motion table? All that means is that it gets set aside and we'll bring it back later.
Yeah.
Okay.
But let me be clear that the motion to table is not an issue as to whether or not we want Mr. McElroy to continue as CEO.
I didn't think that's what your intention was.
Just in case
yeah.
the media that ran out of the room,
Right.
all they see is that it was tabled.
So the idea is that Compensation Committee will revisit this. We'll bring it back at the next meeting as old business because it's been tabled. Do you have a comment?
Just a comment or a question to Ms. Brooks, for the board, talk about the timing of incentive goals and objectives, because we don't have clarity in terms of whether or not we'll have an incentive or not. But if we go too far into the year, it's my understanding that you've expressed concern. So I just, you'll do that better than I will, but
His current contract requires that the board set annual goals and do an annual evaluation of Mr. McElroy. Those annual goals have not been set for this year because we've been working on revising the agreement. And without, goals set for the first quarter of the year, he's only going to be, yeah. There's a little bit of a disconnect between
If
the
we
current
return to
requirement.
incentive, we've got a
if we
problem.
return to incentive, yeah.
We've got a problem.
That's, yeah.
Correct.
Let's not delay this any further. I'd ask Ms. Charleroi to assist us in getting the Compensation Committee scheduled, meeting scheduled before the next board.
I think we could come back at the next board meeting and
Absolutely.
resolve this, and if we did get to that point, I think, we create a base as to when we start the new contract, so I'm not
I
worried
think that's
about
right.
that.
Okay. Any other discussion on the motion to table?
Just a request
Yes,
that we
ma'am.
could, if the compensation committee meets sooner than later,
Mhm.
that we get the information prior and
Yes.
in enough time.
Of course. Okay. Any other discussion on the motion to table? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Great, thank you. We're up to item 3B4. Mr. Brost. Resilience.
Good afternoon, Chairman,
Good
members of the
afternoon.
board. Appreciate the opportunity to present this afternoon on this topic. Basically, the reliability of our electric distribution system, specifically storm resiliency. We've had similar presentations in prior months on the water, wastewater systems, so this is the electric version of that. Timely in terms of Matthew and Irma being in the recent past. There's a lot going on as we speak in Tallahassee, PSC, and the Florida House around storm preparedness and response. And in a few months, we'll be looking forward to the 2018 hurricane season. So I thought this was a good time to put this in front of the board.
Did you say looking forward to the hurricane season?
Well, it's in the future.
Okay.
Whenever we have, and I've been with JEA for 35 years, when we have major storm seasons, it's common for folks to ask the question, why can't we put more of the power lines underground? So we'll cover that. And then the topic of storm hardening. Prior to Matthew, the last significant hurricane to hit the state of Florida was Wilma in 2005. Really did a number on FPL system. They had a lot of folks out for a long period of time. Central Florida, West Florida, Tampa. Following that, in the 2006-2007 timeframe, the topic of storm hardening kind of emerged from Tallahassee in particular and amongst the Florida IOUs as an option, alternative to undergrounding, perhaps more cost-effective way to improve the resiliency of the system. So we'll talk about both of those from a JEA perspective. Looking back decades, the electric utility industry tended to build to a minimum threshold, generally established by the National Electric Safety Code, at basically a run-to-failure approach, minimal emphasis on preventative maintenance, predictive maintenance, little attention to power quality and reliability above that base floor standard. Acceptable from a performance and safety perspective, but not above and beyond. So a number of things have happened since then. In the 70s, underground became the norm for many new installations. In the city of Jacksonville, 1970, there was an ordinance passed basically stating that all new subdivisions would go in underground. So we've had a significant push in the city of Jacksonville towards more underground since 1970, and of course that was just a few years after consolidation. As we went through the 80s and 90s, there was a trend and an emergence towards more emphasis on customer satisfaction. Utilities generally stepped up to improve the level of power quality and reliability for customers. Some of that was driven by the talk around deregulation and customer choice and retail wheeling. So there was a change in our industry that drove that trend. I mentioned Wilma in 2005, the PSC's focus in 6 and 7 for storm hardening. JEA stepped up in 2007 with a specific explicit program to improve reliability and resiliency, essentially our version of a storm hardening program. We've invested over $120 million over the last 5 years in a number of different program aspects. We've significantly lowered the outage frequency and the outage duration for our customers over the last decade. Without getting into all the details of storm hardening and our programs, three are worth mentioning. We inspect and find and repair issues on our 7,000 circuit miles of distribution on an 8-year cycle. We look at poles, but other things as well. We do infrared scanning, we do lightning arrestor checks, we check grounds, and this is a full system check of our overhead underground system. And again, we do that on a recurring 8-year cycle to make sure it's not just built strong up front, it remains strong over its life. We spend over $6 million a year on vegetation management, tree trimming. We're on a 2.5-year cycle. We used to be on a 3-year cycle, and we shortened that up to improve reliability. The more often you go out there and work your system, the more resilient you are from a tree perspective. So we hit our 3,000 miles on a 2.5-year cycle, so that's basically 1,200 miles per year are inspected and maintained. About 5 years ago, we started our Semi-5 program. Since then, we've done nearly 1,000 projects, investing on the order of $24 million. Semi, as a reminder, stands for customers experiencing more than 5 outages in the last month. So this is where we surgically go into the individual service point, the individual meter, the individual neighborhood, and look for hot spots where we've had entirely too many outages in the last year, and we make targeted improvements there. I've included 3 charts at the bottom just for reference. The Semi-5 chart is on the bottom right. We've only been at it since 2013. Started at about 3.5% of our customers being above that 5 outage threshold. We've since made significant improvement, bringing it down to around 1%. A couple of months it's been below 1%. 1% is in line with what the Florida IOUs achieve. You can also see for outage frequency and duration, both of those have come down pretty nicely over the last 10 years. Currently running at about 1.5 outages per year for the typical customer and about 100 minutes of outage time. I'll point out while we've had significant improvement in both outage frequency and duration, in the last 6 or 7 years, outage duration has basically hung in around 80 to 100 minutes. A lot of that is storms. We've had some tough storm years. This is each metric looks back 12 months. But there's been a lot of other non-storm related. We've had a rash of underground outages and some other things going on. All of that contributes to the outage duration. And in fact, when we get into talk about undergrounding a little bit, one of the downsides of underground systems, when you have an outage, you tend to be out longer. It takes longer to find and fix the problem since it's below grade. But with the outage duration being fairly flat as a backdrop, we have launched a new program this year. It's our outage duration reduction program. Started this year. It's a 4-year program. $30 million will be invested. The objective is to significantly reduce the amount of time it takes JEA employees to find a fault, isolate it, and resolve it. We are planning to leverage a significant number of new technology items, pictures of which are shown at the bottom. Most of these will communicate back with our operators at our central control system. And in fact, in many cases, we can control devices, not just monitor, but control from the field. That last bullet is significant. Next month, 1st of February, for the first time, we will begin having our smart meters provide outage information to our outage management system so that we're not largely reliant on customers calling in. So that's a part of the program. Again, we're looking to find problems, know we have a problem quicker, find the problem, and get service restored. Transition over to the discussion of overhead versus underground. Underground does tend to perform much better. It's not perfect and immune from any problems, but major storms, tropical storms, hurricanes, big wind events, lightning, it does better. But there's a number of other factors, specifically cost, that need to be considered. Over the last 20 to 30 years, there's been at least a dozen studies performed in our industry, and not just in Florida, but outside of Florida. All of these have generally come to the same conclusion when you look at the 30-year life cycle net present value and factoring in all of the costs. Underground electric distribution is not cost feasible when compared to overhead from the utility perspective. That basically means is customers have to contribute to offset the higher costs for it to be essentially break even from our perspective. Over the life of the system, any net benefits associated with the underground system are insufficient when brought back present value to cover the higher cost. A couple of additional informational slides on underground. Municipals and public power companies in the state of Florida tend to have a much higher percentage of underground. Part of that is just the density. If you think about the Jacksonville service territory versus FPL or Duke or even TECO, they're much more spread out, and they're not going to have as much underground. The fact that in 1970 the city of Jacksonville put in an ordinance that said all new subdivisions have to go in underground have contributed to the fact that today we stand at about 56% of our 7,000 miles of distribution are currently underground. Looking at the table there, we've got advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons of underground. I'll focus on a couple of the important ones. One of the biggest positives from my perspective, if we had 100% underground, would be no more tree trimming, no more vegetation management, and that's a costly endeavor, and it's an impact on the tree canopy, it's an impact on the community and the customer satisfaction. But the other advantage of underground is it does tend to be much more reliable and resilient with respect to major storms. Fewer outages, not zero, but fewer. On the other side, however, significantly higher cost, both upfront and then the ongoing owning cost. So the cost to own, maintain, and repair over the life cycle is much higher for underground than overhead. You tend to have longer outages. While you may have fewer outages, you tend to have longer outages. It takes longer to find and fix the problem. It's also more costly to make the repairs. Another economic factor is the bottom right, loss of annual revenue from AT&T and Comcast. We get several million a year from AT&T and Comcast to attach to our overhead poles. And that's an area where there's significant evolving technologies around broadband, 5G, small cell antennas, other things that we'll be able to leverage moving forward with our overhead system that would not be an option with underground. A little more details on the cost side. If you just think about the material alone, the transformers, the cable conductor, the switchgear, the underground is 1.5 to 3 times more expensive. When you look at a total project cost, which is the material plus the labor plus the equipment, you're talking 3.5 to 6.5 times more expensive. And that's for new construction. If you come into an established neighborhood that's got overhead lines and look to take those lines down and put in new underground lines, it's even more costly. We've done a ballpark estimate. If we were to do the full 3,000 miles in the Jacksonville community, it would take 20 years and probably on the order of at least $6 billion. If we were to absorb a significant amount of that, you're talking significant rate pressure on our base rates. About a third of our system is mainline feeder, and 2/3 is what we call fused laterals. So that's the second bullet in the bottom section. So if we only did the 2,000 miles of fused laterals, you're still talking $3 billion. It's worth noting that since 2007, the city of Jacksonville has had an ordinance in place in partnership with JEA, where we will go into specific neighborhoods and do conversion projects. They can pay up front or they can pay over time. We've done a few projects under that ordinance. Would be happy to do a lot more. So while from a personal perspective it would be great to have more underground when the next hurricane comes, it will perform better during major storms like that and day-to-day storms. JEA's storm-hardened system actually fared pretty well during the 2 recent hurricanes, and these are just some numbers. We saw slightly over 50% of our customers affected, but 60% of those affected were restored within the first 2 days. And about 3/4 were restored within 3 days. And the early restored services are the priority customers, hospitals, public safety, shelters, critical JEA facilities, and the like. And then we also quickly go after the schools, major intersections, shopping centers, gas stations, quality of life types of types. So even though it takes us 7 days to get down to the last customer and the last neighborhood, some of the critical customers that are coming back quicker are significant. Damage costs on the dollar side, 12 to 15 million. That's our gross upfront out-of-pocket spend. An awful lot of that gets reimbursed. We have an insurance policy for our distribution lines, and we have and then FEMA comes in. Sometimes it takes them 2 or 3 years, but eventually they reimburse an awful lot of our expenses. In summary, we have a strong history of storm hardening and working to provide a reliable, safe, resilient electric distribution system. We think while the outage count and duration during the hurricanes were high and a problem, we think the system performs fairly well. We're launching a 4-year program to significantly reduce outage duration, and although underground distribution is more resilient for major storms, the cost is a major factor, and from an industry standard and from a Florida perspective, storm hardening tends to be recommended and preferred. We talked about the cost to convert and the potential rate impact. If we did 150 miles a year, it's 20 years. You can play with 150 miles per year and do it quicker or longer. Funding sources, the lack of identified funding sources for a significant portion is a problem. And then again, we have some pretty good programs in place that will support kind of the backfill, the older neighborhoods and subdivisions to get their systems converted. And we look forward to doing as much of that as we can do in the future. Those were the slides I had included. Are there any questions?
Sure. Ms. Green?
In the storm hardening, the future initiatives that you have, one of the initiatives was to significantly reduce the time that it takes for JEA personnel to identify the location of the fault. Is that due to staffing, or is it the communication of getting back to
It's really technology. When there's a problem on the system, we may or may not know it. Probably 1/3 of the time we know it, and 2/3 of the time we don't know it until customers call. And then even when we know we have a problem, we don't know where it is. So we have to put people in bucket trucks in the field to go ride sometimes miles to look for the problem. So to the extent it would be better if we had a lot more people in the field looking for problems. This is a smarter technology method of devices in the field will call us and tell us approximately where the problem is. So it's about leveraging technology.
Okay, thank you.
Is that the smart meters, trip savers?
It's the fault current indicators. It's the ARs and ASs. It's really all of those components.
Anything else?
Smart meters help. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Revenue bill. Ms. Singh?
Just a couple things.
Yes, sir.
So on page 3, when you say in the 1970s, underground construction became the norm for many new installations, so it's not all, like what installations are not put underground and kept above ground?
What really happened in 1970 is the technology in the industry got to the point where it was something that was an option and could be done fairly from a fairly affordable perspective. All new subdivisions, residential and commercials, subdivisions go in underground.
100%.
100% in Jacksonville. And that's generally true in St. Johns County where we serve Orange Park. I will add that the developer covers the cost differential. Underground is more expensive, so it's not done at the utilities expense. We recover the cost of an overhead system in our base rates. So in the case of a new subdivision, the developer pays the premium, which gets passed on to the home builder and the home buyer. It gets embedded in the property.
But and I guess where I was going with that is I know on reclaimed water, there's been issues where developers have the ability to go to city council and get a waiver from being able to do that. There is no process where a developer can go get a waiver to not,
Not that I'm aware of.
okay.
And I haven't seen any in my 30 years. Yeah.
Perfect. I want to commend you on the semi-5. I think my term on this board started as you guys were just, implementing, finishing the first year of implementation on that. For my colleagues, this is, I attended one of these American Public Power Association, and I was surprised to know we were one of the few utilities that actually had that metric. And other utilities didn't even know that metric existed.
Yes,
So
certainly
we
new.
were, we were kind of, ahead of the curve on that, and I think it's really kind of helped us identify these trouble spots. And then last question, and Mike, I don't know if you want to answer this or punt it to Mr. McElroy, but I read an article, let's see, January 9th, and the headline was, "Cities that want underground FPL utility lines to get cost break." And it talked about how FPL had gone to the PSC, and there was some decision that had taken place that actually made it more cost efficient for cities to be able to underground existing utilities. Now, understanding we're not an IOU and we're a municipal-owned utility, I couldn't understand what had actually taken place at the PSC that allowed that to happen, and
Yes,
whether
sir.
or not that was applicable to Jacksonville as well.
Yeah, so the PSC promulgates rules and guidelines associated with projects like this, underground projects, in terms of what the utility should absorb in the rate base, which they then approve, and then as the rate base, and then what the customers need to provide. We follow and track that. We don't have to follow it, but historically we have, and we're on top of all of that. The article, yeah, I'm familiar with the article, fairly new. The formula it's fairly complex. It's got 7 cost values in it. One of the things that you're supposed to charge, so this would be an existing overhead conversion underground. One of the things you're supposed to charge is the cost to remove the existing overhead, net salvage, plus any undepreciated book value. So those are elements in the equation. FPL and/or the PSC, not sure who brought it up, argued that in the case of FPL, they shouldn't be charging that if they are planning on going in and doing storm hardening. If it's already been storm hardened, then that doesn't apply. But if it's something they're going to do next year, and they're going to come in and tear the existing system out anyway, they don't need to charge that to the customers. So that's a nuance. I don't think in the big scheme of things it's significant. It's small crumbs.
Okay. But it was, if I hear you right, it's tapping into FPL's margin as opposed to...
Really is rooted in the fact that they've got a major program to harden their system.
Okay.
We're essentially already there at JEA. They're playing catch up. They've got a much bigger system and a lot of history. We've gotten our system about where it needs to be. So there would not be an underground project that comes to us where we're fixing to go in and do a substantial amount of work. If that were the case, and that does happen from time to time, we'll rebuild older parts of our system. We would waive that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
We try to be consistent.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Mr. Roast, on the undergrounding issue, I understand that new developments are required to go underground, and I understand that we have a program on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis where the community can vote to bear the cost of going underground. But we don't have any initiative to convert overhead to underground independent of those. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And
But all of the storm outages from Irma were 100% wind-driven, taking down overhead lines. Did we have any underground that?
we had underground problems, flooding related. We had to shut down an entire substation downtown, Water Street. We had to come off the Main Street Bridge on the right, across from the Jack's Chamber. Underground tends to be susceptible to trees coming down, either hitting the transformers and switchgear, or the roots will pull up the buried material. There was a hurricane, I don't remember if it was Ike or Katrina, that hit the Mississippi coast and washed an entire electric system out to sea. Basically, the transformers and pads and the conductor and the cable all washed away. So it's for a normal storm, I would say certainly in the case of Irma and Matthew, the underground system did fairly well.
Any ballpark estimate? I mean, 90% of the outages, wind,
So,
overhead?
and the other part is our system is designed to what's called grade C or higher. Most of it is grade B. The lower the letter, the higher the strength. We can withstand sustained winds up to and exceeding 100 miles an hour on the distribution and 120, 130 on the transmission. We had no outages in Irma or Matthew where the wind knocked down any of our assets. All of the outages were the wind taking trees down and the trees taking our conductor down. We can withstand the wind. We can't withstand major tree assets, limbs, or full trees coming down, taking out poles and transformers and wires. So,
Okay.
had a lot of outages but almost all tree related. So, but again, whether it's the wind or the trees, if it were underground, you'd have less problems. That's certainly the case.
I guess I'm confused by the studies that conclude that on an NPV basis, it's far more expensive to go underground, and yet we require all new construction to go underground.
Yes.
Is that striking anyone else as inconsistent?
Well, the economics are being looked at from the utility perspective, and from a utility perspective, it would provide significant increased pressure on the base rates if we were to absorb that higher net NPV. I think the drive for underground had more to do with aesthetics in 1970.
Sure. And still today.
And there's some value in that,
Yeah.
but we tend to not evaluate the aesthetics in terms of the economics, the dollar values.
And in the new, the cost goes to the consumer.
Yes.
Through the
Yeah, they're paying the
developer.
developer. Yeah,
Absolutely. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're not absorbing that, yeah.
Do we have a policy for replacing wood poles with steel and concrete on an ongoing basis as part of the hardening and resiliency?
We have our design standards on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it calls for wood, sometimes it calls for concrete. Not steel on the distribution. Steel tends to be used on transmission. I will offer that, a bit of a misconception, inherently concrete poles are not stronger than wood poles. You specify the pole to a certain strength standard. You can buy wood poles that are stronger than concrete poles. You can buy wood poles that are spindly toothpicks that are very, very. So it's all about what level of pole you specify, and we design it on a case-by-case basis to meet the needs. Concrete poles are hollow, for example. They're not solid. It's a steel reinforced concrete. So they also have very little bending moment. They don't bend, and they basically break. Significant number of concrete poles we saw damaged in Puerto Rico when we went over there. Huge number broken at the ground line or just bent over on the ground.
A lot of the hardening has to do with the loading on the pole.
Yeah.
And so, to Mike's point, depending upon the strength of the pole, the number of wires, the weight, the distance
The
between.
amount of
spans
equipment you put on it, yeah, the number of conductors hanging on it. We'll
You're going to
put
get
a
all the
concrete.
wood components to come out at the next meeting.
Yes.
We
Yellow
use,
card.
our engineers use concrete poles when they need to maintain the adequate strength.
Well, Mr. Rose, thank you for this report.
Thanks,
I
sir.
appreciate all the effort that went into it. I will say that I don't think we've heard the last of the overhead versus underground discussion. There's certainly a large number of members of our community who are concerned with the aesthetics and appearance and might assign a higher value to aesthetics than some of the studies that,
Yes.
that you've cited. And I suspect that this will come up again. So it's something we need to be mindful of and evaluate. One last
agree.
question for you. On the contracts that we sign, or maybe for Paul, with the
AT&T.
telecoms, AT&T, Comcast, whomever, is there any flexibility on relocating those to other facilities as long as they stay in the same geographical proximity? For example, if you move from an overhead to an underground, would we have an obligation to relocate those somewhere else, or we're tied to that pole, that location?
Well, generally, they've got to come with us,
Right.
and when they don't, they're below us on the pole. So generally, they are much slower, months, if not years behind us. So what we'll do is go and clean out, we'll cut the pole. and leave them on the pole until such time there's demand for them to come underground with us.
Thank you.
Or to relocate, yeah.
Got it. Any other questions for Mr. Rose?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I would, for the record, though,
Thank
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cumber did cite an article, and I would like to just reflect on the last paragraph, that yet FPL has warned that underground power lines are generally more expensive and more susceptible to storm surge and flooding, which can result in longer outages after a hurricane. So we got to be careful in terms of balancing the perspective.
That's the Sun Sentinel article?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then, let's see, Ms. Dykes, back up on monthly operational and financial review.
Hello again. I have a very brief presentation to wrap up the formal board agenda for this month, to review the operating and financial metrics for the first quarter of this fiscal year. Beginning with water and wastewater, we report our safety metric each month, and that safety metric is organization-wide. So although it's the first metric on the water and wastewater report, that is reflective of the safety performance of the entire organization. And it is significantly better than last year and running below our goal for the year. So that's great news from a safety perspective, because our first priority is making sure our employees go home safely each day. We do have a couple of recordables that have popped up in January, so I do expect that number to tick up a little bit next month, but still very good performance for the year. In terms of other, I'll focus on just the stoplight colors that are not green on this page. And on the nitrogen to the river, we are running a little bit ahead of our goal for the year on nitrogen to the river. That's driven by two things, or really three things. One is there's some pretty big construction going on at the Buckman Wastewater Treatment Facility. When that wraps up, that'll put us right on track to be well under our permit limits for the year, so I don't expect any long-term issues there. The second is just volume. It's been a wet year, which contributes to that. And the third is your fun science fact for the day. When the temperature drops, the proportional amount of nitrogen to the river increases. And that's because oxygen is required as one of the components to strip nitrogen out of the wastewater treatment process. And water oxygenates much better at warmer temperatures. So the cold weather has been contributing to that as well.
Look at you, you scientist, you.
Don't ask me any questions about that. That's all I know. SSOs, we're running a little bit ahead of goal if you annualize that number, but well behind last year. And one of the things we do for each SSO is do a root cause analysis to allow us to get better and better at this metric. So hoping for some improvements there. On the electric side of the business, on electric outage duration, we are running ahead of our goal. The goal is 80 minutes, and we're at 107 and a half. That is an annualized number. So if you look back over the last 12 months, that's what that number is reflecting. The biggest driver behind that is weather. We've had a very stormy past year, which is driving that number up. Also coupled with the amount of our system that's underground, maybe piggybacking off of the last presentation, our underground outages tend to be longer in duration than the overhead outages. Skipping down to generation plant performance, we are running behind on generation fleet reliability. That reflects some issues that we had in October. We've had a very good November and December in terms of operating performance, so we're still catching up on that metric from the issues that we had back in October. On the customer experience side, the only stoplight that's yellow is first contact resolution. Ms. Stewart touched on this during her presentation at the beginning of the board meeting, that they have run into some staffing issues that they're working hard to correct, and this metric is improving over time. And to wrap up with the financial results, we do have 3 yellow circles that are on this page. They're all reflective of cost performance or capital expenditures for the year. This does reflect performance for the first quarter projected out through the whole year. And we're going to be working hard through the remaining 3 quarters of the year to make sure that we post performance that's in line with our goals for the year on both sides of the business. Any questions on the operating or financial scorecards?
Any questions? No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, almost there. Open discussion. As anyone who's attended these meetings in the past knows, we don't have an opportunity as board members to chat outside of this darn sunshine law. So any questions or items? Ms. Green?
I don't have any today.
Reverend Newbill? Mr. Cumber?
No, sir.
Okay, great. Any new business? There is no old business. Mr. McElroy.
Brief report this month, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members, for the support and the discussion earlier with respect to the CEO contract. I look at that as really reflected on the team, not so much me. We've got a great team here that does great things each and every day, that's supported by over 2,000 individuals in the community that are doing tough utility work regardless of the conditions. So thank you for that consideration. I would note we are having a little fun with respect to outages. I am certainly a proponent of the best solution for our customers and our community. Well, a couple of key things that are generally left out of that conversation is, number one is competitiveness. We do everything we can to be competitive with our products and services for our consumers, balancing cost and value every moment of the day. Any major push in terms of any major expenditure that JEA as a utility has to undertake that others in the state and others in the region that don't will affect the competitiveness of our community in terms of economic development and just really what our residential customers pay. So we've got to be really mindful of that. And it's always interesting to me that we've got programs out there where customers that have the means can sign up for $10,000 per unit to take their services underground and generally balk at that. But somehow a solution that if we do it everywhere, the cost is going to be lower than $10,000 per unit. I miss the math on that, generally speaking, but so we've got to really think about that in terms of, we hear, well, it's only $3 a month, et cetera. No, it's $10,000 a residential unit. Pay me now or pay me over time, and over time it's going to be $20,000 with time value of money. I struggle too in this community. One of the biggest challenges we have in JEA today is in the wastewater system, in the fact that we've got critical infrastructure underground that is susceptible to flood and storm surge. And so we're turning ourselves inside and out on how to elevate, how to make that more sustainable. And we want to take the most highly reliable portion of our infrastructure and bury it underground at the same time we're struggling with the other. So that's a big reconciliation. It's not a value judgment one or the other, but it's a reality of what we're struggling with. I think, too, the expansion of technology, what's going on right now in 5G and the demand on our poles, now whether we just participate in renting on the poles or we participate in a broader sense, there's big opportunity there, and that's all above ground in terms of Wi-Fi, et cetera. We know going underground and trying to, via our metering solutions for water versus our metering solutions for electric, once you put electrical devices run by batteries underground in Florida, in our region, you're asking for problems. You've got water table issues, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to be mindful of that. And then I think finally, just the fun piece of this, so we can line up a little bit. We've had 5 outages, and I tease Mike and his team since October. We're underground services. We've lost a frog and a squirrel in the process. One was a frog, one was a squirrel.
Are you talking about your personal home?
This is my personal home.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And my sister-in-law is on the same circuit, and so for Christmas, we opened up gifts and we had large backup battery packs for ourselves. So when we say the underground services is the answer to the solution, and it's not a complaint. Mike and I have talked about this type thing. Boy, it's just interesting to observe it and sort of be part of the community.
Is that why the semi-5 metric ticked up?
Ticked up a little bit.
So there was a little tick in that.
Sure.
But again, thank you very much. Happy New Year to everybody.
Thank you very much. I have no report from the chair. Anything else? Go to the order. We stand adjourned.